How you doing, man? I know a few of them. And the great news is when price high, they still is straight. All right. So we're gonna get started with this. Thank you all for coming out. Those that came out the last time, thank you for coming back. I promise this is going to give you more information than you had last time, but we will cover a lot of the same things. The benefit of being for both of them is that I am definitely going to say some things tonight that I missed last time, and just different variations of the same thing. So I'll start with a little bit of background about myself and how I've come to kind of be here and my work history and how I've basically figured out this kind of AI thing. And then we'll go into what are large language models and how do you use them? What are the differences between GPT-3 and GPT-4 and other language models? And then we will also talk about how you can use them. We'll go into a little bit of prompting. This is not really going to be a prompt workshop. We will talk about how to do prompts effectively, but the real goal for this is to teach you how these language models work and then kind of explore the boundaries that you can push and when it comes to content creation and getting good materials out of this. To wrap it up, we'll talk about some of the newly released plugins with ChatGPT, and we'll also talk about some of my favorite AI-powered tools and how you can take advantage of those. So to start, we'll start with my background. So I've been in the digital marketing industry for over 10 years now, and I have been in my own space running my own agency for 4 since 2019. But the power and the superpower that I have is that I have had to sell in a very difficult and competitive market when it comes to adapting new technologies. And so I had to come up with really creative ways to apply technology and creative solutions to get results and provide value for my clients. And so the superpower that I bring to the table is that I bring a really unique perspective when it comes to looking at business problems and then using different tools to achieve a certain outcome. And now with GPT and these AI powered tools, it makes all of us 10 times smarter instantaneously if you know how to use the models properly. And so that also gives you a new perspective in which you can look at business problems and problems that the market is facing and apply a completely new solution to an existing problem that used to take probably a lot of time and resources. Now it can be solved in a whole lot less time. So, what are large language models? A large language model is a few different things. So, essentially, it is trained on a huge amount of text data and other parameters, depending on which model it is. It's trained on a huge amount of data, over 576 gigabytes specifically for ChatGPT. And it is then trained further with human feedback, machine learning feedback, and other mechanisms to tell the model this is correct and this isn't correct. So, how do you basically differentiate between the two, and how do these things work further than that? So they're powered and they're able to learn and do a few extra things that the researchers and the people that are creating this technology, even they don't know. And this is probably a good point to stop and say that I am not an expert when it comes to ChatGPT and AI in general, right? I'm not in there developing code and writing these algorithms and things like that. I have just been using it daily for every task under the sun since it came out in November, and I've gotten to be really good at applying it in certain ways and manipulating the inputs and the outputs to get the information that I want from the engine. So take what I say with a grain of salt because I don't proclaim to be an expert. I just have done a lot of different real world applications and come out with some really, really great content from using these different tools. So what are the differences between ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 4? I didn't actually fully explain what large language models are. So GPT, generative pre-trained transformers. Essentially, it's trained on a large data set, and then there are additional scores and additional feedback loops that are layered on top of this. And so when you look at the earlier and the iterations of AI and how they've evolved from here, there have been machine learning algorithms that will rank choices in the training period. So it will basically have the engine give an output and it will get scored. This is a good input, this is a bad output, right? And it will rank those in the order of which, how they scored on the test. And those got smarter and smarter over time because there was additional context being poured into it. But the difference between GPT 3.5 and 4 is that OpenAI specifically added something called reinforcement learning with human feedback. So essentially, before you were giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, essentially, when it comes to grading the outputs, now they're doing that. They're also ranking certain outputs. They ask for multiple when they're doing this training period, and they will rank the outputs depending on how the human researcher will rank the outputs depending on how well the completion was. And additionally, behind that ranked system, they will add further human context. This output was the right one and it was ranked so high because it met this criteria or it did this well. And so that extra reinforcement learning gets fed back into the system. And so when it comes across this situation in the future, it now has additional context to pull from and to generate more of the content that you're looking for. So when it comes to actually, what are the nuts and bolts of this? How does it actually work? This is just a very, very sophisticated word prediction engine. So the way that this works is that it is trying to predict based on statistics and probabilities and all the data set that it is trained on. It is trying to predict the next word in a sequence based off of the prompt that you give it. So it's pulling from its training data set, understanding the additional context from its scoring system and its training sessions, and it's trying to predict the next sequence or string of words that you ask it to give it based on the prompt that you've entered. And so essentially, a very sophisticated word prediction engine. And so the difference between 3.5 and 4 is that it has that additional context of reinforcement human learning. And then it's basically, this is one of the things that the researchers that are creating these things, they will tell you themselves that they don't know why some of these things are happening. They can't pinpoint a reason why the model made such a huge leap or why it was able to learn such a concept. One of the earlier examples of this is that they basically built an algorithm to determine the sentiment of Amazon reviews, whether it was positive or negative. And throughout all of the Amazon reviews that it ranked, it ended up learning and kind of creating this infrastructure. And it played a big role in the development of ChatGPT and the large language models. So they will tell you that they don't know specifically how some of these things happen. So we don't all have the answers. Some of the other models that are mentioned here, Lambda, Palm 2, which is Google's, Llama, which is Facebook, and Claude, which is from Anthropic. I'll talk about some of these other ones, but this is really going to be focused on kind of ChatGPT because that is the tool that, for me, in my opinion, is the gold standard for right now. They were the first, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best. But as of right now, I have tried Bard and I've tried Bing, which uses ChatGPT. And for me personally, for my use cases, GPT-4 has been by and large the best in my experience. So these large language models are basically, think about our brains. They are neural nets and they process information and they pass it off to different neurons. This is essentially what's happening with these deep learning algorithms. These neurons will take in information and fire depending on how complex the request that you're giving it is, and it will try to make a reference based off of your query, looking at its data set and its training data set, and try to come up with a contextual and reasonable answer based on what you're giving it. So this, again, I am a stream of consciousness on this. So this is a guardrail just like last time. This is the actual definition, right? Computer programs to help designed to help computers understand and create text similar to how humans do. They're looking for patterns in their previous data sets and looking for the opportunity to create those patterns again based on statistics and probability. So I already talked about the differences between GPT-3 and 4, but the biggest difference is that it is the reasoning skills are much better because of that reinforcement with human learning and feedback. So you can test this for yourself by asking a nuanced question or asking a particular question that you feel that would elicit some sort of emotional response or an emotionally polarized response. So a great example of this for me recently is that my dog she injured her tail from swimming too much, and I just asked it, what do dogs have a higher pain tolerance than humans? And the first thing that it said is that it's important to keep in mind that dogs do feel pain, and kind of preface this, but it said generally dogs have a lower pain threshold. So if you ask that with GPT-3.5, it's not really going to give you that extra context, and it's not really going to give you that nuanced answer. But you can also see the difference in this when you're asking for a polarizing question, right? One of the things that people talk about is the ethics and who controls the data that goes into it, right? the specific use case that you can imagine is right that, Hitler is a very obviously touchy subject in world history due to the atrocities that happened, but historians, people writing papers, researchers, they need to know this information. And so how can you basically put that information in a model that you can't really control the output, but also still maintain the integrity that people need for history and other purposes like that. And so that's a great example. If you ask a question about that, it's not going to basically just like gloat. If you ask it to write a glowing review about Hitler, it's not going to do it. It will tell you, it will give you guidelines and certain things like that. But if you ask it a different type of question that's maybe not so polarizing or so sensitive, it will give you a much more nuanced answer and show you both sides of the coin. So a good exercise you can do is basically to go and ask it one of those hot takes and see it for yourself and see the reasoning capabilities between the two. Okay, so let's talk about how we interact with LLMs. The first thing that you want to do is you want to be clear and specific when you're giving it tasks. So again, this is a word prediction engine, and the better that you can structure the input, the question that you're asking it, with your punctuations, your spaces, your wording, your languages, all of these seemingly tiny things actually matter. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, talks about he's not really that much of a prompt engineer, but he has worked with and seen a lot of people that will go really deep on engineering prompts, and they will test so many different variables. And he said that so small as a comma or a singular space in a prompt difference will generate a much different output. So be clear and specific when you're giving it your prompts. You don't want to basically just put in a bunch of poor grammar and speak like you would speak to a person. You want to structure your sentences and you want to structure your inputs to get it as clean as possible because you're trying to basically, I don't want to say conform to, but keep in mind the best practice is that it is trying to generate a sequence of words based off of the thing that you've given it so far. So if you are vague or ambiguous with it, you're not doing yourself any favors, basically. So be clear and specific with what you're asking for and give it additional context. So treat it like an expert, but remember that it's not a human. It is prone to hallucinations depending on which model you're using. I'm looking at Bard specifically for this, hallucinates right off the bat. People are like, I have heard a lot of people say that Bard got a lot better in the last 2 weeks. Those people are liars because I got on Bard and just basic questions and it just got it wrong every single time, I don't want to really get into it. Anyway, so treat it like an expert, but understand that it's not a human. So be sure that you're not just taking the output as the word of God and gospel, that this is the right thing. So you need to be sure that you're fact checking this information. Another thing with this too is that it may have the contextual learning and feedback from these reinforcement loops, and it can also learn and infer from the data set that it's trained on by recognizing patterns, but it doesn't have a shared world model like we all do. Last time I talked about how some of the leading experts in AI advancement are talking about creating this artificial general intelligence and how it may mimic what we have, which is basically a language processing unit, which is our speech, our shared experience, our perceptions in the world, and what we know to be true about the fabric of reality, and then basically a reasoning engine to interpret those two together, right? We know how we fit in the world, and we know if we touch a hot pan, we are going to get burned, right? A language model does not know that. It knows the theory of it, but there are plenty of cases in which there are context, and context changes the output or the outcome of the scenario, and these language models don't have that. They are talking about kind of creating this shared artificial general intelligence that combines all three, right? That can basically take your input, reference a shared library or world knowledge library, which is something that can be really taken as truth, and then use a reasoning engine to deduce what you ask it, understand the context in the world model, and then use the language model to put out the output to basically say, this is what we're trying to accomplish here, and this is the reason why. But right now, large language models don't really have that. GPT-4 does a great job with the extra additional context with the RLHF, and it does really well. So we're seeing sparks of general intelligence when it comes to GPT-4. And I listened to a YouTube video today with one of the scientists at Microsoft who got really early access to GPT-4 way back in September, and they had benchmarks, and they basically went through a bunch of different examples and asked it arithmetic questions and all these different things. And you could see where he asked a question but didn't specify certain parts of it, but the engine basically through the process of deduction got to the answer, even though it didn't have the steps in between to tell it exactly what to do. So it learned a little bit. And speaking of learning, right, it's frozen in time. It's not going to continually update unless it gets updated from OpenAI, but each time is a new thread. And so it's not going to remember the context that you've given it before in any of your other threads. It's going to start fresh. However, in the course of that thread, you can teach it new concepts and you can introduce new ideas and new theories, and it will learn and it will connect the dots between its existing training data set and the new concept that you've just given it. And if you're telling it that this concept is rooted in fact and it's a factual thing, it will take that information and then apply it with new perspective to its training data set. So it can learn within the thread and it can become smarter. This is something that I've used personally. The example I gave last time is that I wanted to create a social media content creation framework based off of several other different frameworks. And I basically started by saying, here, I want to do this, create this social media framework, and I want to base it off of these other frameworks. Please list them out with their deliverables and what they do, right? And then the next step I said, okay, I like from this framework, I like point A, this one I like point C, this one I like point D. Let's combine those together and please rewrite this framework and explain how it will work together and why combining these new parts to create a new framework. So you can teach it new things inside of the context of a thread. Remember, it will not carry over to other threads. So that's really cool when it comes to basically like giving it a little extra information to become more general artificial intelligence. So I talked a little bit about context and examples. A lot of people, I don't really see this. I talked with Heather about this today. A lot of people aren't really going back and forth with the conversation and asking more follow-up questions and what do you need from me and how can we make this better? The more context that you give it, the better the output is going to be. Because again, it is trying to pick the next likely sequence of words given its training data set and what you've said. So the more context that you give it about the situation, the background, the tone of voice, all these different things, the better the output is going to be. Kind of like crap in, crap out, right? Examples right behind that, if you give it a great piece of context and say, this is what I'm looking to do, here is all the information that you need, and then at the end of that, you give it the context or the example of, this is how I want it to come out. This is the exact way that I want the example to come out. It knows what you're asking for and exactly how to structure its output. So you're positioning it and you're putting it in the right direction to give you a better output. So rinse and repeat. Keep the conversation going. If you don't like the way that something came out, you can tell it that. You can tell the engine, you totally missed on the tone of voice of this. I would never say this. Instead of this, I would say whatever else you would say. Give it that additional feedback. You can do your own version of reinforcement learning with human feedback, and you can continue going through that throughout the different responses and threads that you make with it. There's a lot. You can do a lot when it comes to one particular thread, especially if you have access to GPT-4, and you can basically get it to exactly what you want it to say, given enough feedback. And it's going to continue. Remember, it's going to learn within the context of that thread. And so today, when I was editing this presentation, I had to go through probably 3 or 4 different iterations to get the style of writing that I wanted to get for something later in this presentation. And then from there, I had to do the same thing probably 8 more times. And so it got the right output that I wanted. And I said, okay, now please do the same thing for this topic. Please do the same thing for this topic. So I kept going and kept going. And towards the end, I got kind of lazy and I said, stop. I just said, I forget the please do it like this. I just put in the next topic and it wrote it out in the same way. So it will continue to learn. It will have context up to a certain point that you don't necessarily have to continue feeding it the same information. Once you've got a repetitive pattern and it can kind of recognize that pattern, you can shorten it and you can kind of get, a little bit more creative with it. If you do that and then you do not It stops giving you the example that you want. Basically, go back and say, hey, don't forget, this is the format that we're looking for here. Please make sure that you write it in this format. The last thing is keeping an eye out for inaccuracies. I think we just briefly talked about this, but don't rely on this to be totally accurate, because again, it is prone to hallucinations, which is basically when it doesn't know the answer to a question, or it's run out of context within the conversation, which is particularly prone with 3.5. Hallucinations it won't tell you basically that it doesn't know the answer. It will give you an answer with authority. It's not necessarily going to be the right one. And there's a lot of people that are talking about this specifically, that OpenAI is not doing enough to address or call out the fact that some inaccuracies may be present. That's kind of a hot button issue. But for me personally, I haven't seen that many hallucinations using ChatGPT. So everybody's different. Everybody's experience may be different on this. Okay, token limits. What are tokens? So tokens are essentially dependent on what model you're using. So a token is essentially a word, a character, a space. Depending on what model you're using, it will characterize tokens differently. Some models will break the word hello into one token. Some of them will break it into two tokens. There's a very rough rule of thumb that one token equals two words, essentially. So what are the token limits differently between GPT-3 and 4? GPT-3.5 has a token limit of 4,097, meaning that you can put in, oh, I hate how this is doing this, meaning that you can put in up to 4,097 tokens in the input and the output. Why is it so grayed out? I'm so sorry. Yes. So GPT-3 has a lower token limit than GPT-4, meaning you have less context, you can have less real estate to put in information in GPT-3 and get better outputs than GPT-4. So it's the inputs and the outputs, right? So essentially you can think of it as this way. You can have 2,000 tokens in the input and you can get 2,000 tokens on the output. It's a subtraction arithmetic formula to get to that magic number. GPT-4 has higher limits depending on your access level. It's either 8,000 tokens or 32,000 tokens, depending if you've got developer access in the API. So what is more tokens? What does a higher token limit actually mean for you? So we talked earlier about giving context and giving up as much elaborative detail as you can. Larger token limits allow you to do that. And there's been studies and there's been research done about token limits of up to 1 and 2 million. And think about what can you do with that? The example that I gave last time is that Chris and I were talking to our friend Justin, and we talked about this paper and this study, and said, well, what could you possibly do with 1 or 2 million token limits? For context, that is the entirety of the Harry Potter book series, and it's 5 continuous days of audio transcriptions. It's a lot of data. And so what are some of the potential use cases for this, right? A perpetual tutor that will grow up with you and remember the context and all the things that you've learned, and especially how you learn those things and how you best perform with those. Personal healthcare. This is potentially hot button issue because of data rights and privacy and things like that, especially when it comes to inaccuracies and giving bad health information. But the founders of OpenAI have been very clear about the fact that they believe that some healthcare is better than no healthcare, and they want to be able to provide this information, and that a lot of people lack the basic access to healthcare information to make informed decisions about their healthcare specifically. So you can think about a personalized healthcare assistant as well that has all of your specific data. There are actually already AI solutions in place that are used in enterprise level hospitals and healthcare facilities that do something like this, that use AI technology to help with the healthcare process. Creative assistant, novel scripts, the example that we gave last time was, give it all the Harry Potter book series and then tell it to rewrite it as a Jedi, which is really cool. I'm a huge comic book fan and Marvel fan, and the Russo brothers, Joe Russo, talked about the capability and the possibility of us being able to have in the future on-demand personalized content for movies that is generated at the drop of a hat based on our prompts. And it's not really super far away, because Like if we get to this point with 1 and 2 million token limits and the models get smarter and the models get lighter and faster and the processing power gets better and better, we have this capability to create all this multimedia based off of our own whims and desires. Legal advisor for drafting contracts, agreements, and other legal documents. Really cool, especially if you're a business owner, right? There are specific applications of GPT and other AI technologies that are using AI specific in legal and healthcare, in legal scenarios already that's been specially trained. GPT-4 does pass the bar exam, which is great because GPT-3.5 did not pass. Really, I think it was like 10% on average was the standardized tests that it passed. Now, GPT-4 passes almost all of them. And then the last thing, a virtual companion that can simulate realistic things and conversations. There are quite a few bits of news. I don't know if anybody's seen the OnlyFans model that took all of her 2 years of YouTube content and created a chatbot in Telegram and is charging people $1 a minute to interact with this chatbot of her. And yeah, she made like 72 grand in the first week, which is wild. But basically, it took all of her transcripts and her YouTube's 2,000 hours, put it into a database, layered it on top of an AI, and turned it into a chatbot that kept context and was able to interact as her. And it also took it a step further, and they synthesized her voice, and so the responses come back as her voice. Right. Other personal companions are Replika, which is Replika. Basically, they're creating these virtual companions, and then Snapchat is basically plugged directly into the GPT engine with my AI. If anybody has done that, my AI on Snapchat, it's kind of creepy. What? Kind of creepy. So, all right, let's talk about creating effective prompts. When you want to create a good prompt, so to make a stopping point here, right? So I wanted to teach you kind of like how these things work. To sum up everything that I said, you can envision yourself talking to the smartest person that's ever lived, more smart than everyone combined. And all you have to do is just reach in and tap into that specific expertise of whatever domain that you're trying to learn about or produce content for. And so as you understand that, and I tell people all the time that you can act and interact and conversate with ChatGPT as if you're talking to me as a marketing expert, as if you're talking to Chris as a health and fitness expert, as if you're talking to Mike as a venue expert. That's how you should be talking to these things. And you should be expecting to have a continuous conversation to ideate and to better understand what is happening or ask different questions. Take it 10 steps further than just give me a prompt or give me a social media post for the next 7 days for my product launch. Take it 10 steps further and give it additional context in each different prompt that you do. This is who we're trying to target. How do you think that we should best talk to these people? What tone of voice would be best to reach these people? All these different things. And as you go through, you are creating your own personalized prompt with how much more information you're giving it and additional context to what your objective is specifically. So keep going, keep adding to and keep pushing through and use it as a way to kind of bust through barriers or creative blocks or mental blocks so that you don't have to get stuck and you can continue providing it the information that it needs to provide a good response. Delimiters, I said before, this was the knowledge nugget for me that I didn't know until I watched this webinar training series from DeepMind and OpenAI in a partnership. Delimiters, which is basically any set of 3 actions, whether it's 3 dashes, 3 parentheses, ticks, or 3 plus signs on the front and the back of your entry. And so I will give the example this time. I did not give the example last time. But essentially, when you're trying to get a prompt and when you're trying to say, here's what I want you to do, and I want you to base it off of this example, if you don't have some sort of a delimiter in here telling the engine that this is the prompt and this is the example, it's going to get confused a little bit and it's going to try to continue and kind of like suss out what you're meaning by that based on the text that you put in. So when you put the prompt in and then you delimit it with whatever it is that you're going to use for that, and then put your example in and clearly label that delimited section as your example, and then finish it at the end, you're now effectively communicating to the engine, this is what I'm looking for, and this is the example output. It knows to separate between those two because of the delimiters. Who knows about delimiters? Anybody know about delimiters? If you don't raise your hand if you came last time. Cool, cool. I also didn't ask what people's knowledge level was. So let me just stop and do my due diligence, because I don't ever like to talk down to people. And if I've said anything that you don't know, please let me know. Who is using ChatGPT or another AI tool on a daily basis? Oh, a lot less than last time. How? Okay, a weekly basis. Oh, interesting. Um, okay. What do you feel your expertise level is? Low? Do you feel like it's low, high, medium, low? So between low and medium, I think, for the room. Okay. So these are just basic principles, I think, at this point to help you get over the hump and work with these systems better. So the next thing you can do is you can ask for structured output of what you're looking for. So if you want to put information in a table, or if you wanted to generate an SVG image, or if you wanted to generate it in JSON or HTML code, you can ask for those specific things. Let's just say, for example, you're asking for a list of the top 10 most populous cities in the US, and it gives you the list. And you say, okay, well, can you please put that information in a table with the population size next to each one of them? And it will generate a table for you with the city name and the population size in each one. So you can ask for multiple different formats depending on what you're looking for. Check for assumptions. This is really good because you can basically prune and pre-prompt your response, or pre-prompt the response, by asking if it understands what you're looking for. So if you're giving it a prompt and you're asking it to do something, at the end of the prompt, the task is to do this. Is that understood? You're asking it to confirm if the prompt makes sense and if it can do it. If it does, it will say, yes, I understand it. It will give you a very short synopsis of what it thinks you're looking for, and it will go on continuing writing the prompt. If it's not clear, it will say, I'm not 100% sure, or something similar to it. It seems like you're asking me to do this. Is that what you're looking for? And it will ask for clarification. And you can then say, no, I'm not looking for that, and go into the context again and say, instead of doing this, I want you to do it this way. So checking for assumptions gives you the opportunity to get a better output before it kind of continues going off the rails, before you can reel it back in. Okay, the next is going to be dynamic variables. So I love this because this allows you to get a lot more bang for your buck when it comes to putting in information in the system. So we talk about dynamic variables in the same way that we do in web programs like email builders and website builders and things like that. MailChimp is a really great example, or any other email autoresponder or other web tool. Basically, if you have a stored value within your system, most people will be able to understand contact first name to say in an email program, this is put the person's first name there. The same thing works here. So I'll use the same example as last time. So if you have an SOP, you can put in the conversation brackets SOP, and then you write equals, and then you write out whatever the content is that is supposed to define what your SOP is. And throughout the course of the conversation, as I was explaining this last time, you're not necessarily going to be using the word SOP, the bracketed SOP, multiple times in the same prompt, but you probably will use it multiple times in the same thread. So you're basically just using a shortcut that you can go back and reference at any time because the thread already has the definition of what the SOP is. So if you're trying to create an email sequence and you've created 5 different emails and you need to say, okay, according to this SOP again, let's do something else. Let's create a social post for it. A really great visualization for this is tone of voice. In that specific example, right? If you define what your tone of voice is, very well detailed. We also worked with Heather on this today. Very well detailed of what your tone of voice is, and then you give it an example. All of that can be contained in the prompts or the bracketed tone of voice. And so as you go through and you've said, okay, this is the tone of voice, now create an email in this tone of voice. And you do 5 or 6 emails. And then you say, okay, well, now I want to write social posts. Please write me the social post using the same bracketed tone of voice. And if you don't have to write out the full tone of voice, and you don't have to write out the example, it's already got the context earlier in the thread. All you have to do is use that little key, and it's going to remember to go back and grab that SOP, or the whatever the context is for the dynamic variable. It's a legend, yeah. That's a good way to put it. As you go through and do these things, think about there are a lot of different applications for AI and how we use these things, but I really focus a lot of my conversations around content creation and generation because it saves so much time of our brain power trying to come up with these things and the words to write these things. And so that's where people get the most bang for their buck is content creation and text generation with these things. So as you go through and you see yourself continually doing the same actions over and over again, tone of voice, social posts, like SOPs, all these different things, create a document, a Word doc that contains all of the information for your dynamic variables. So the next time that you open up ChatGPT and you're having to write your content calendar for the next 30 days or 7 days or whatever it's going to be, instead of typing out all of your tone of voice and your SOPs and your like how you work with people, go to your Word doc, grab your variable for your SOP and your tone of voice, and just chuck it in there. So you don't have to waste time, and you've now got a record of all of your legends and your keys that you use on a regular basis that are customized specifically to your business. You can also take those keys and run them through ChatGPT and say, hey, I want to make this better. How can we make this key better? And it will iterate depending on what it knows it needs to have in order to generate a certain output. The last thing on the dynamic variables is that, again, you're not having to write all these big, long explanations, especially when it comes to something like examples and context and things like that in multiple different requests because it's in there. And so you save on your token limits and you can give more creative context in each request that you're passing through. Okay. Any questions so far? Steve? Everything that I'm talking about so far is on the free version. But it's important to keep in mind the context of how smart it is and the outputs. Everything that I'm talking about, you can do on the free version. The quality of the information may not be as good as the paid GPT-4 version. The additional context that's been given from reinforcement with human feedback, which is only introduced in GPT-4 and not in the earlier model.
You got to know what the monthly rates are.
It's $20. Very, it's not terrible at all. And it also gives you access to plugins and web browsing, which we'll talk about a little bit in just a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about a few basic prompts, right? Chances are we've all done this. One of the first things that we've done was just basically ask it simple questions, generate an engaging question, create a tweet, write our social posts, compose a LinkedIn post, all these different things. And because GPT-3.5 and 4 are good with the amount of data that it's been trained on, it will produce. Is it Bridget? Was her name? I think it was Bridget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bridget said last ESC it will produce C+ level marketing, which I initially took a little like I was like, oh, maybe not so. But then I understood, yes, it probably does. If you just give it a simple prompt, write me a social post for a yoga company, it's pretty generic, right? It's good, it's written well, it's got emojis and all these other things, but it is pretty generic. So think about that. The more, like, those are just basic prompts. If you want to get a better output, you're going to be using more information. You're going to be giving it dynamic prompts. You're going to be giving it much more to go off of. This is an actual prompt that I use to create an email sequence. I sent this to my VA team because I didn't want to sit there and use this prompt and say, okay, give me the content list and now write the emails, and for me to have to wait for all this time. I worked with ChatGPT. I said, I need to create a list of content ideas so I can send it to my team so that they can use ChatGPT to recreate the emails in my thread every single time, my tone of voice, all these different things. And so this is the first part of the prompt. And then the second part of the prompt is, here is the example. Here's the delimiter. Here's the delimiter right here. Right below, you see the 3 ticks in between? That's the delimiter. That's what I'm talking about as a delimiter example. So I've now given it context of what the prompt is, and here is a sample of what I'm looking for. So it is separating between the two of what the query is and what the sample is. And so basically, coming through this, here is a sample of something that I'm looking for. I gave it the background information of what we're trying to do and the information of how I like to compose my email so it knows how to sequence the words and present the information. And then here is the content example of how I want you to put this information out into the world. The third part of this is, it's labeled part 2 because I basically put those as one. The third part of this is that they took that content list, copied and pasted this prompt, and then at the end, they copied and pasted the output of the last template that I gave it. So this is happening in 2 separate threads. The first thread is generating the content creation calendar. The second thread is taking the topics and the illustrative example that it was given and writing an email with the structure that we've asked for before. So some people will call these mega prompts. Some people will call them dynamic prompts. There's really not a standardized name for this because, again, this is also like widely available. It's a very new technology still. There's really not experts in it so far. So
to produce that result,
what?
these mega prompts, are they necessary, or is there can you go longhand?
To get a really good response, yeah, they're kind of necessary. I don't want to say the full length of it, depending on what words you use and what context you can give it, and how effectively you can communicate what you're looking for. It doesn't have to be super long.
Well, a lot of that is for people that have some grasp of coding.
Well, this is all, and it's not really. No, there's no coding involved on this. The example with the brackets there, that was because I use an email provider that has those things, and I'm basically saying this is the value for that. So there's not a ton. Yeah,
You're assigning the value to ChatGPT.
yeah, yeah,
You're telling it what that means.
yeah. So like that goes back to the learning that we talked about earlier, right? It doesn't know what email provider that I'm using, but I told it that it can use this and it will pull the person's first name. So all it has to do is just write that every time it's thinking about writing the person's first name. So I kind of pre-paved it a little bit with that. And if any of this is going high level, please let me know. But yeah, the more elaborate and the more detailed that you get with your explanations and the context and examples that you give it, the better the response that you're going to get. And you can get good responses with shorter prompts too, depending on what type of information you give it. The next thing is prompting the model to think. So if you give it time to think, if you give it a framework and a task SOP, the chances are you are going to get a better response because you're telling it the certain steps to take to get to a response. A good example of this is to summarize the main points of a given text. The SOP for this is, first, read the text carefully and identify the main topics. Step 2, write one sentence for each subtopic. Step 3, write a sentence that summarizes all the main topics and the relationships between the subtopics. And then step 4 is combine the sentences into a coherent paragraph. So things that we learn as children on how to write and construct paragraphs, basically we're reinforcing that within the model to do the same thing. And so you're forcing it to do these steps. And again, because it has this reasoning engine, it will go through step by step and then it will think, it will do the things, and then have the better output at the end. If it produces incorrect or unsatisfactory outputs, you can instruct it to show its work. This is particularly helpful for math problems. One of the examples in the video that I watched today was that it asked it to solve a simple arithmetic problem. It was like 7 times 8 plus 8 times 4, right? And the answer it came back with was 102, which was the wrong answer because it is trying to produce a continuation of the sequence of the words. But after it said 102, then it started to list out, in order to get this result, you first have to multiply the two integers, and it went step by step, and then it got the right answer. So if you give the model time to think and you give it a framework, an SOP of how it's supposed to solve the problem or get to a desired output, you're greatly increasing the chances of it actually getting the right answer. Any questions on that? No. Cool. Yes. Yep. Give it time to think. Basically, like you're structuring how it should interpret the query is another good way to say that. It's not like it does take extra time to think, depending on what the complexity of the query is. So essentially, you could say that you're giving it more time to process and compute what you're asking it to do. And if you give it those additional lines, it's going to go line by line, think about it, like look for its reference points in its training data set and its reference engine, and basically compile the sequence of words after that. So you are giving it a little bit of time to think. All right, so now let's talk about how you can use ChatGPT in your business. So automations, I am leaning a lot into AI enhanced automations now using forms, surveys. So essentially, if you are automating anything at the current moment that maybe has to do with data sets or anything like that, form fills, you're moving information from one side to another side of the internet, you can plunk down an AI worker in here and have it perform a certain function. You can have it interpret form information, form field data, which is what I will show in the example later. You can have it categorize people based off of the type of responses that they give and maybe assign them to different email sequences based off of that. You can create, generate, and send out tailored content specifically for people, depending on how they've interacted with you and your website before. So anywhere you can think about dropping in an intern. Now it's just an AI model, right? You don't actually have to pay this person. The easiest one here, quality content, right? The better this, like you think about this way, right? You don't have to spend the brain power to actually think about what is the best social post, what is the best survey question, what is the best way to arrange the information on my landing page. Like, you can give it what you have and say, please act as an expert marketer and critique this landing page for me. And after it's done with that, well, why did you critique it this way? Why did you give me this answer? And you can ask the reasons, and it's going to say, well, as an expert marketer, your conversion rate is going to suffer because your headline isn't calling out a pain point, or it's not giving enough desire, whatever it's going to be. So creating high quality content that you may not necessarily have the skills to produce, but you can ask the engine the right questions to get good content out of it. I'm like almost putting myself out of a job because like I'm a marketer, right? And like people pay me to come up with this good content. Newsflash, you're paying me to do it in ChatGPT. But I provide like a software solution now, so I'm giving the keys to the kingdom away. I don't mind if you learn how to do this marketing yourself, because again, just because you can doesn't mean that you want to, right? And so there's still going to be a market for that. Decision making, brainstorming. This is a particular great one, and there's a plugin that we'll talk about in the end of the presentation. Have it play devil's advocate if you're trying to make a decision about your business or your product or how to improve your service, right? Give it the context of what you're trying to do, how you serve people, how people interact with you already, the way that your product works and the way that it solves problems. Give it all this information and say, how can I make this better? Or how can I position this to a different market? Or how can I just improve this product overall? Or tell me what I may think it's good at, but it's actually not good at. And so you can get multiple angles on your decisions that you're trying to make about your business. I would recommend using the GPT-4 engine for this because it's better at reasoning for this. Freeing up brain power, I talked about this earlier, but right, if you think about all the smartest people in our society and how much time they spend compiling and crunching numbers and data just to get to the interactive and the innovative part, the AI is going to compress all of that and free up so much more time. The easiest way to explain this is that a basic coder with basic knowledge is producing content and producing code at the level of 5 and 10-year experience coders because it's got these AI copilots to be able to create and reference existing code blocks and things that it's trained on. And so all it basically has to do is say, I want to do this, this, and this with this prompt. Please write the code for it. And then they can take that code and test it and say, okay, well, it didn't work. And here's the error why it didn't work. And GPT said, oh, well, if it's got this error, this is the reason why it didn't work. And they can make things better, right? So freeing up brain power is one of the great tools that GPT is going to allow us to do more and more in the future. Role playing. I love this. The example that I gave with Sheldon is he was looking to interact with somebody over email and was trying to negotiate a deal. You can feed in an email thread in this is specifically in the context of a sales situation or any type of situation in which you're negotiating. Feed it all of the information into the thread from your emails, from the situation of the deal, from their emails, everything that you can give it regarding this situation, and say, here's all this stuff. I want to role play a potential sales call with this person, or I want to get a certain deal out of this equation. How can we do this? And it will assume the role of the person. You can tell it to assume the role of the person and interact with me as that role. And so you can kind of like pre-play the game and see all of the different angles, right? Think smarter about how you're using this in your business and how you can use this to get an advantage in the competitive marketplace. All right. So this is the example that we talked about with AI enhanced forms. So, it sucks. Essentially, there are 5 questions that we put on this form for John and Laura, which are life coaches. What are you looking for in a life coach? What's a recent example of something that holds you back? What does success look like? And what are you looking for? I can't remember the last one. But essentially, these are the answers that I provided for this AI form. And then this is the response that it came back with. Oh, man. Hold on one second. This is the response that it came back with. This is a personalized email based off of John and Laura's SOPs that I loaded into an automation and previous examples of work history that they've worked with prior clients. So what the AI is doing is that it's taking the form input and the answers that the person has provided into the form, and it's referencing a shared library, a knowledge base of how John and Laura would interact with this person, and then writing a detailed and personalized email to send back to this person, basically explaining how they would work with them based on their unique scenario. And how do I do that? I don't do it. I've just explained it. I said, you are going to receive, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, you are going to get the responses to this survey. And I gave it the questions. And your job is to reference the SOP of how we work with people and then draft a response as if you are acting as us in response to that person's unique scenario.
So being able to dump files, possibilities are infinite.
Yep.
You could say like your own personal files and
Yep.
say, please learn how I.
Yes.
It all has to do with prompting properly.
Yeah.
Because
Mostly, yeah. You have and this took a while to get to this point. It took about 10 different iterations to get to this point where it was repeatable every single time. Creatively, you're having trouble getting into it.
Getting GPT
I think. Are you giving an example? We'll have a Q&A afterwards. We'll have a Q&A after. We'll do a Q&A after this. So giving it information and prompting it to think a certain way and then saying and acting, this is where we're talking about plunking in an AI worker in the middle of a response, because normally when you submit a form, you're going to get, thanks for submitting our form, we'll get back to you in 24 hours, right? But this is coming back personalized within 5 minutes. And the goal of this is that this person that has submitted this form has got an immediate response from the coach, and it's personalized to their specific scenario. And so it really increases the likelihood that that person will actually book a call because they feel seen and heard from a life coach specifically, right? Think about the different applications of this. It can be a customer service bot. It can be anything that has to do with answering your questions based on your data. You can apply that in this scenario. All right, so now let's talk about plugins. Overall, I want to say that I have been mostly underwhelmed by the ChatGPT plugins. I was so stoked last time, but there are only a handful. Actually, there's 28 pages of them, so I haven't actually gone through and tested all of them. But these are some of the ones that I am most I like the most. Vox Script is going to be the first one. Vox Script allows you to summarize YouTube videos from the transcript that are attached to them. So if you want to ask what are the main points of a long video without watching it, compare the different opinions, learn new skills, right? You've got this basically you give it a link and say, okay, what are the main topics? How can I learn about this video? Summarize it, whatever you need to. The next one's Block Atlas, which is pulls off of US Census data. And so you can interact with this. And as a business owner, the example that I asked you to give, potential locations for business expansion, economic status of those areas. If you're looking for a certain demographic, you can find where that demographic is most heavily populated, right? Let's say you're trying to go after adults age 55 plus that make over $200,000 a year. You can ask it, what is the top 10 zip codes that fit that criteria, and you can then go out and target your Google Ads campaigns specifically to those people based on that, rather than trying to find that information yourself. Ask your PDF, probably my most favorite on this list. Essentially, you are looking and interacting with a PDF. It can be over 100 pages long. I asked the plugin how long can the plugin be, or can the PDF be? And it didn't really give me a good answer, but it said, it depends. And I said, okay, well, what about 1,000 pages? It said, well, we'll probably have a difficulty with 1,000 pages. I said, okay, well, what about 100 pages? Yeah, it can definitely handle 100 pages. So you give it the link of a web-hosted PDF, and it will go out and crawl the PDF and pull the data in chunks. And every time you ask it a question, it will reference that document and provide a context and a contextual answer based on that document and the GPT infrastructure. This one is really, really powerful. Zapier, or Zapier, depending on how you pronounce it, has a direct integration. And so what you're doing with this is that you're able to craft a custom automation using Zapier and ChatGPT. So you tell it what you want to do. I want to automatically transcribe meeting data that shows up in this folder and send a recap email after every email or after every meeting. So you type that into ChatGPT with the Zapier plugin, and it will give you a customized Zap that you can press a link and it will import it directly into your Zapier account. So you're creating custom Zaps without the technical know-how and jargon. You're cutting the learning curve when it comes to creating automations for your business. And you can use ChatGPT in here. So Nancy, talking about how do you create this and how do you give it the right thing, you can tell ChatGPT what you want it to do in the Zap and in the automation, and it's going to include that in the automation. So this is a really, really cool tool, the Zapier plugin specifically. Zillow, it does plug in specifically with Zillow for searching home data. Okay. Search listings, view property information, details, interact all that information. If you're a realtor, you can find properties that find a specific need. See Andy taking a picture here. Provide instant property details if you're on a call with somebody. Basically enhancing your knowledge, right? I don't know. I don't do much in the real estate space, so you guys can tell me if this is actually valuable or not. So yeah, so I figured that Zillow probably wasn't the most up-to-date information, so use that as you will, but you see the contextual capabilities of this, and you can probably use it in other different ways as well. Craftful. This one is fun. This one allows you to basically interact and ideate new business ideas. It's designed and prompted to be this business strategist. So you can look at brainstorming and refining new product offerings, how you can bring it to market, how to make your business more successful, adding it as a virtual mentor, right? So this is designed around creating better business strategies for yourself. OpenTable, this is more of a personal one, not so much of a business. You can ask OpenTable for specific foods, specific cuisines, who has tables open for a party of 20, who can handle that, what the specific items are on the menu, what the pricings of those items are as well. So OpenTable, really cool. There's an AI for that, and I'm almost finished here. There's an AI for that. Basically, you will give it an idea, and it will say, there's this AI or this AI, and it will help you do those things. So if you're looking for all these different AI tools to help you accomplish the different things that you're looking for, use there's an AI for that plugin, and it will give you an idea if there's actually an AI to help you with that. Lastly is more personal too, tasty recipes. So we all know, I think, hopefully, that ChatGPT can create a meal plan for you if you give it the right parameters, right? Create me a 7-day meal plan. I like steak and I like chicken and I don't like to cook it very long and all those other things. It will generate the meal plan. But now with the Tasty plugin, you can pull that information from the millions of Tasty users and recipes that is collected over the years since Tasty became an internet phenomenon. So that one's fun too. Okay, so now let's look at the digital gold rush and some of the tools that you can use that are coming out from these internet startups. So we are firmly in the same position as the internet was in 1992. AI will completely transform this world. I was shocked to know recently who was it? I think it might have been Pew Research came out with a study that polled people in March. Only 14% of Americans have tried ChatGPT, which I thought was pretty weird, given the fact that they have 1.6 billion users and they crossed the 100 million user mark within a month or 2 months. It will be able to market itself in no time. There's a lot of interesting statistics when it comes out of that specific report, but regardless, this technology is reshaping the way that we work. It's reshaping the world, and the people who are at the forefront that are actually doing it, you guys are already at the front of the pack because, like I said, 14% of people have tried it. You're now already ahead of those folks. And so these are some of the tools that you can use that are really cool that I've used personally that actually do a good job. And so keep in mind when you do this that don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like don't go create a business or a product service off of one of these because who knows when the company will fold, they run out of funding, whatever else, right? So take it with a grain of salt and use it with that in mind. Perplexity is an AI answer engine. I talked about this before. It's basically now that ChatGPT has internet access through Bing, it's becoming a little bit deprecated, but they did make an update. Basically, if you go to Google right now and you ask a question, you have those drop downs of additional related questions. Perplexity will do the same thing, but also give you AI answers behind those questions. So it's like creating this narrative for you using Perplexity to help you learn better. Synthesia is an AI-based video creation tool. If you don't like to be in front of a camera, you can create an AI avatar. It will create the voice for you, and it will create the avatar. One of the cool use cases I heard about this recently is basically having a live meeting transcription, and the avatar is through Synthesia. It's sitting in the meeting, and you can interact with it in real time. And so you say whatever the name of it's going to be, Ada. Can you please reference our quarterly report from last year and tell us what our profit margin was? It will go and reference the data, synthesize it, and then spit it back out as that AI avatar speaking to you as a part of your AI assistant, which is it's cool. It's really wild. Adobe Firefly is an art generator as well as a video generator. The really cool part about Adobe Firefly, I told this to Nancy, is that in addition to creating new images and new artifacts and images, it is doing storyboards. It's creating a video storyboard entirely through animation, generative AI, and it can also fill in your videos with applicable B-roll. It will analyze your script and it will analyze things and it will go out for Adobe Stock and pull in stock video and drop it in your timeline. So you've now made a much more engaging video and you don't have to do that. 11 Labs is probably my personal favorite. It is a voice generation and cloning service. So you can take a sample of a voice clone or a voice sample and then create a clone of it. And it sounds really good. It sounds really, really good, especially those that have a bunch of different voice samples and they've perfected it.
Drip song.
Yep. Really, that's a really cool example. That song slapped. That song slapped, by the way. This guy created an AI song and had Drake and I think Kanye sing it. And, yeah, that was Weekend, yeah. And it went viral, and Warner like slapped the hammer on him, and it got taken down. But it sounded exactly like them. The song was great. They should have re-recorded it, but also too, there's a big opportunity. I think the music industry there's a big opportunity for co-op creative with this. Basically, Grimes is the model that Grimes is applying for this. Is she's saying, sure, here is my voice stems. Go out and create it, and I'm going to take 50%, and you can have 25%, and the label can have another 25%, right? Co-op share of this because I think we're going to get so much better content if we do it that way. Mm-hmm.
Mixing that.
Interesting. Interesting. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
Well, Oasis did that.
Yeah. I'm going to look into that. Gamma.app is an AI-based presentation platform, so you can give it a full outline, a text outline of what you want, or you can just like give it an idea, and it will go and create a full illustrated presentation. That's what this presentation was created on, was on Gamma. So if you hate creating or designing PowerPoints, you can now skip that whole process. Stability.ai is a stable diffusion. It's an image generator, right? It's what's making these images, these AI images online, and making them so realistic. That's what Stability is all about. They released Deep Floyd with Stability the other day. Now they have the ability to put text directly in an AI generated image, which is something that AI generated images have struggled with in the past, which is putting accurate text in the specific image. Illustrate is an AI tool to create graphics, vector graphics, icons, things like that. It's really great if you want to create a graphic that doesn't exist. Maybe it's not in Canva or whatever else. You can create your own version of that. And then this one is definitely my favorite on this list. Use ChatGPT.ai. Somehow, this is wild. Somehow, this showed up above my settings in the actual ChatGPT application as a little ad, and it disappeared the next day. And I clicked on it, and this is not affiliated with OpenAI. But basically, what this is it's a Chrome extension that will allow you to select your AI model, and anywhere on the web browser, you can right-click and bring up an AI generation to create content with it. So you don't have to go to ChatGPT. If you want to write something, you want to write an email, whatever else, open your email, right-click it, and say, write an email based off of this, whatever else. You can use GPT, you can use Claude, you can use Bing, you can use Bard, several other AI models with use ChatGPT.ai. You can choose which one you want. All right, that's it. That's all I have. So we can talk about questions if you want. If you want, I'm offering a free AI consult. The only thing that I'm asking for on this is a testimonial, because I'm still trying to figure out how to monetize this as everyone else does. And it helps me to understand what the market needs using these technologies. And you are going to get a ton of value out of this, I promise you, if you do book this with me. And then you can also download the presentation by scanning that QR code, put your name and email address in. It will automatically kick out a link with the presentation to download after that.